Hello guys, and welcome back to the last lecture of the King's Gambit series. Tonight we're just going to talk about the main line against the King's Gambit. Most often variation when you play second move f4, and that's e takes f4. Before I start examining and just giving you all these variations and possibilities for both sides, I just want to tell you one thing. From now on, you're going to be able to buy and purchase all these, I would say, package for the King's Gambit. And you can find it and figure out more about it either here on the channel or on my site. But I just want to tell you one more thing. This is so big file. And there are so many opportunities on both sides. In here, I'm just going to give you like the most important lines, model games, and most important tricks and variations. If you really want to get like the complete file about e takes f4 and what are you supposed to do, you just have to ask me and you're going to be able to find it in my PGNs that I sell, as you know. Let's go. So after like e takes f4, white plays knight f3. On your question, is that the only move? Do we have to play knight f3? No, we don't have to play knight f3. We can play knight c3, we can play bishop c4, we can play a whole bunch of other moves. But you just opted for knight f3 because we develop peace. We just fight for control of the center, and basically you're just surrounding your queen with this knight, which basically prevents any queen h4 ideas by black. We have to check so many possibilities. There are 8 different kinds of variations here for black. Let's begin with d6. It's called Fischer defense. Speaking of the Fischer defense, it's nothing that special. They're just blocking the light square bishop. They're just opening the light square bishop. At the same time, they would just like to go with some early knight f6 so they can, just like in some other variations, avoid e5 ideas by white. And on your question, what are we going to answer? What are we going to do against the Fischer defense? We're going to play bishop c4. In my opinion, that's absolutely the best move. You're just completing your development, preparing yourself for castles. You know, we have so many possibilities. Once again, you have bishop e6, for example, and bishop e6 don't take, because then they would fix the pawn structure and even defend the pawn on f4. But you play queen e2 and so on. If they play g5, similar to some other main variations, you go like in Kaiseritzky Gambit. But now, not like in Kaiseritzky, you cannot play knight e5. But okay, since the pawn is on d6, now I can play knight g5, which is another thing. You know, they have problems with the pawn on f7. They gotta go with knight h6 to defend, and boom, you go d4, building up a strong center. You want to capture by bishop on f4 and get a nice game. For example, Morphy played like this zillions of years ago. I believe it was back in one of his simul's in 1859 in Philadelphia. But this like looks very, very powerful position for white. Anyways, after bishop c4, h6, you just go h4, so you're not allowing them, like in backer defense, to connect themselves with g5. So they go knight f6, they would like to go with knight h5 and knight g3, but you go knight c3. And here I have one line interesting to show you. It's a reminiscent of nothing else but a legal gambit. And if they play bishop g4, believe it or not, you go d4, they go knight h5, and now on knight h5, like, oh, they are defending the pawn now, we can't take it, right? Oh, they have already pinned our knight, so what are we going to do? Boom, you played knight e5. Who would expect that you can play knight e5 and still go with the legal's gambit after knight e5? So if they capture in d1, you just go bishop f7 and da-da-da-da, it's checkmate with 2 knights and the bishop. But that's not a point. Point is that when they take like this, you take the bishop, you play queen f5, and just like you see, you just have a beautiful type of the game with a bishop pair. And just like I previously told you, and I'm gonna keep repeating that over and over throughout this video, if you want to find more about the analysis, you're gonna have to ask me for the PGN here, because there are so many analyses about these lines and I simply cannot go into every single line. If they go with bishop e7, you just go with e4, you want to get the pawn back on f4, and after like knight h5, looks like we can't take it, and they also sometimes threaten this, and you have a very lovely knight e2 thing. So you want to get the pawn on f4, plus afterwards, now you can't do it. I mean, you can do it, but playing queen to d3, bishop d2, and long castles. Before I carry on, of course, this is a correspondence game played back to 2010, but fairly recent for correspondence chess. And if you like me, I very much enjoy White's position, because this type of King's Gambit for White turns out to work in practice really well. And look at this, the opposite side castles. White has like a pretty good attacking chances on the king side. F4 pawn is almost unavoidable. I mean undefendable, unavoidable to lose. And White is just very promising, and that's basically what happened in this correspondence game. I want to tell you one more thing, and I'm also going to repeat it throughout this lesson a couple of times. I have to thank to Nepomniachtchi to most of the ideas of the King's Gambit and these variations. He gave such a great boost to this opening lately. I believe he even made a course about the King's Gambit, and that's a fantastic thing. All his variations that he's been constantly using in Title Tuesdays, in his blitz games, in his rapid games, you cannot even imagine how big improvement he gave to the King's Gambit lately. It's in absolutely modern fashion. He absolutely modernized most of these variations that used to be, like considered boring or maybe even refuted. No, it's not a case anymore. And in most of the lines that I'm going to present today, I'm just going to give his suggestions and his lines. So let's go for the next one. Next one is, instead of Fischer defense with d6, if they go with d5. It's called modern defense. Modern defense, just like in any modern position, they don't want to go with any kinds of accepting the gambits and doing stuff like that. They just want to play very active. We, of course, take on d5, and now they have, once again, the whole bunch of moves and possibilities. I would go with queen d5 and knight f6. For me, queen d5 is not a good thing, because you develop with tempo knight c3. If they go queen d8, you play d4, holding the center, and you want to take on f4 this pawn. After bishop d6, you develop a bishop, queen, trade the queens off, play short castle, and you just go with knight b5. You want to remove the bishop, and afterwards you want to remove the pawn on f4 as well. If queen e6, bishop e2, bishop d6, for example, since you can play knight b5, but somehow they will probably be able to keep the pawn on f4. I found a very interesting idea, knight g5 here, chasing the queen away with tempo and playing knight e4, and now you're just chasing this bishop away with tempo while keeping the knight on c3 and controlling the center. After that, king h1, king goes out of the diagonal a7 g1. It's not anymore in the danger. Playing knight e2 with tempo and playing d4 with a very a lovely type of the game. And this is the game between Eline Roberts from the Netherlands and Laura Unuk from Slovenia. The game took place like 2.5 years ago in Germany. Eline Roberts won this game. I just have to show you like a very interesting way of showing the game. Laura Unuk decided to defend this pawn on d4, and that's okay. But when Eline played c4 to play c5, black played c5 and thought, okay, she was holding all her threats and completely forgot about the next move. Boom, b4. What a lovely thing. If you take by pawn, fork. If you take by queen, knight is hanging. If you take here, fork. What a lovely way to win the game, and in just 15 moves, Elaine Roberts was completely winning. So just like you see, you can use these kinds of variations and stuff on all kinds of levels. No, you don't have to play this only King's Gambit in Blitz or some active time controls. No, it's absolutely playable on all levels. After Knight f6, which I definitely consider here the main one, here I would take and I would use approach of Nepo. He goes with bishop b5 check, developing his pieces, and after c6 capturing, and after knight c6 playing knight to c3. Black just defends the pawn on f4 by bishop d6, queen e2. You remember my previous lecture about a previous video about a King's Gambit where I told you that this new approach of engines in the King's Gambit says, hey, you always should be fine in most of these endgames with queen e2, queen e7, stuff like this, because eventually you should just chase this bishop away somehow on d6, get a pawn back on f4, and white should be absolutely fine. If bishop e6, I believe that this is exactly one of the lines that we covered in the last video. So I'm talking about the video e4, e5, f4, d5. And here, after this, you take once, you take here, they just have terrible and very broken pawn structure, and then you just go with b3, going after all these weak pawns. That's thing about these positions and this stuff. So we've seen d6, we've seen d5. What about bishop e7? It's Cunningham defense. Cunningham defense with the idea to develop their knight and play short castle, which would give black, like a very safe development and opening position. Also in some positions, maybe even if we talk about this position immediately, you're threatening bishop h4. So two ideas behind bishop e7, to go bishop h4, breaking the position of the king on e1, and another thing, playing knight f6, completing development with short castle. After bishop e7, white goes with bishop c4. Bishop c4 not only stops d5, not only opens castle, but in a way fights against knight f6. I'll show you how. So if bishop h4, just like in other King's Gambit type of games, you have king f1 with a safe king. Here, I would mention just for, off the record, and I would say you can find it in, for example, the PGN as an additional line, but I'm just going to mention it here. G3. It's interesting line. It's typical in the King's Gambit spirit. So they take, you play castle, and now you say, I go for full development of my pieces, put my king on h1, which is going to be defended by the pawn on h2. Usually it's the white pawn, and here it's the black pawn. But from another point of view, you just have to go with some sort of initiative along the f file, thanks to this bishop here against the pawn on f7 and so many other things. Black played d5, white captured, but not by bishop because of knight f6, and then you have problems with both. If you lose the bishop pair and the light square bishop and the light squares, you're going to be weak. But captured by pawn, bishop h3, knight h4, and now not bishop f1. I mean bishop f1 to take, but I meant you don't want to take now bishop f1 or queen f1. You play queen e1, defending on h4 with tempo, giving check, and afterwards you recapture by bishop on f1. Believe it or not, white is better. So g3 is also interesting for, and you can just go with that one. I know it's gonna be for you more in the spirit of the King's Gambit, so it depends on you, whatever you prefer. For example, for my taste, maybe I prefer a little bit more g3 because I like wild chess. Maybe if you ask me which one is like more solid, since I made as a promotional top line king f1, I believe it's the one that is more solid, then you just put the king in safety. If they now play d5, you capture by bishop, they go knight f6, you take the bishop for nothing, they take the bishop for nothing, and when you take, they take the knight. And now you would just say, so what about this, Maya? Nothing. You just have to know that here, what has a very, very strong results. For example, famous queen e7, hey, Don't avoid any kind of endgame in the King's Gambit in 21st century. It's always better for white. Another thing, and this is an email game back to 2021. It's a fairly recent one with the strong engines. If king d8, you go queen f2. You know my approach. Let's exchange the queens, and then you're just going to the guy played d3, bishop d2, eyeing both pawns on a5 and f4. Want to play knight c3, king on d8 is weak anyways. You're opening up the back rank, and what is just easily better in a game like this. Just like I said, many more analysis you can find in the PGN. Knight f6. It's similar to the third move, knight f6. You just go with e5. Simply, it's so logical. You don't want to give this time to breathe that easy. Nepo played against Caruana in St. Louis Blitz knight h5. Caruana put the knight on h5. Nepo played knight c3, played e4, castles, played h3, kicking the bishop away, and this is how they played the game. If you ask me, Nepo was Nepo was better in this game. The game eventually ended as a draw, but for example, right after the opening, I really enjoy in white's position. After like e5, knight g4, d4, he's holding the center, defending, and after bishop h4, once again, you can play both king f1 and g3, but somehow this time I gave you g3 to be more in the spirit of this opening, and after this, and after this, knight h2. All of a sudden, you threaten to take on f7, which is an immediate threat. You also want to go after the knight on g4, so they do not have time for this because of bishop f7, and it's winning. Only move is d5. You capture en passant, take on f7, and play bishop f2, defending checkmate. When they play knight f2, which is funny because they just go after the queen and the bishop, you just take the queen, they go like this, and you play bishop e5. And once again, I believe that this position requires like a deeper analysis, but somehow I would say position is maybe a little bit more pleasant for white, but it's certainly one of those positions with mutual chances. Then we go for the Shallop defense. Shallop defense is a very common thing nowadays in practice by black players. They just threaten to take on e4, they just develop piece and kind of provoke us to play e5, and it's gonna be looking like an Alekhine modern without a pawn on an f-file and with a dark pawn on f4. Anyways, you play e5 and they have to play knight h5. I'm saying they have to play knight h5 because, believe it or not, it's way better than knight on d5. What's so bad about this knight on d5? You play knight c3, challenging knight. They take and you immediately capture by d-pawn. You're taking towards the center, which basically opens up both of your pawns, and you want to get the pawn back immediately, bishop f4. Just like you see, it's a very, very lovely thing for white. You play queen e1, you're unpinning yourself, you want to play knight g5, you want to play queen g3, and white has an amazing mountain of initiative. This is another email game and game that I really enjoy for white really, really, really a lot. And instead of knight d5, what happens when they play knight h5? There is a recent practice about this variation, and I can't wait to show you the following trick because it happened in Waikanze between two 2650 guys. And look what happened. Yargos Peshak played against Tabatabai from Iran. Actually, Peshak was 2640 and Tabatabai was 2690 when this game was played in Tata Still B tournament in Waikanze. So knight h5 played Tabatabai, Peshak played d4. He sooner or later wants to get a pawn back. This guy played, the best move is d5. The Tabatabai played d6. And take a look at this one. Queen e2. What a nice move. Threatening e takes d4 with check to win the game on the spot. And now look at this. I found more than 20 over the board games and over the 1,000 online blitz games with the following mistake. Bishop e7. You take on d6. Looks like they're about to lose the bishop. But you're still not, maybe you still don't feel what's the real threat behind this. Ta-da-da-da. You threaten the bishop, but you want to go with check and win the knight. 20 over-the-board games and more than 1,000 blitz online games. It's crazy. And now whether you take by queen b5 and you're just losing the knight and go home, maybe bowling is for you rather than playing chess, or if they just take by pawn, another thing, queen b5 and winning the piece. And that's why when you play queen e2, they have to play d takes e5 to avoid it. Now you take by knight. Now when you take by knight, you're threatening to this naked king, but you also threaten to take the knight. They have to go check, and you play g3. Another g3, always like a thing that saves your king fully. So after knight g3, h takes queen h1, you just play bishop f4. I wouldn't go deeper than this. I'm just going to once again bring up some top names. Nepo beat Firuzia like this in 25 moves. In Norway, Chess Armageddon Blitz game, which means that he had to win with white pieces, and he used the King's Gambit. And another game that I found here and put it into the PGN is Aline Roberts against Kashlinskaya. Generally speaking, you're down an exchange and even a pawn, but somehow everything is compensated, which is so typical for the King's Gambit, because all your other pieces work, and somehow you just have to like what white can offer in this position, because take a look at the development of white, and you cannot unlike or you cannot just say I don't want to play like this. I mean, and that's why Shallop defense is nothing to be afraid of. When they play knight h5, d4, they have to go with d5, definitely to avoid this queen e2 followed by e takes d6 and queen b5 check variations. And when they play d5, just break in the center with c4. Here, you won't believe what's going to happen. If they play c6, reminds me of some Caro-Kann positions, we just sack that pawn on f4, which is even good, because as soon as we get a pawn back, we're going to enjoy like full activity here. When they play bishop e7, you just can go with c takes, isolating the pawn on d5. Go with bishop e2, they go bishop h4, weakening this king on f1. But I don't consider this position being weak for us, because we have a nice, typical King's Gambit solution of problems. It's g3. So you play g3, attack the bishop, they take, and you put the king on g2, and then you just want to go with the rest of your development and the rest of activity. After like c4, g5, g4 is absolutely the most beautiful move in this position. It's a crushing idea in this one. Lots of games I found with c4 where you challenge the black in the center. It looks like they defend the pawn, and they all want to go with g5 with a very, I would say, aggressive thing. g4, queen h4, going after the king on e1 immediately, and now like a cold-blooded reaction comes a fantastic pawn sack for white. What's so special about this? For example, if they go with, I'm going to show you few things here. If they go with bishop g4, you just go rook g1, attacking that bishop, and when they play f5, you go and attack bishop again. They take, you take, threatening both, and when they play knight g3, you take on d5. White is completely winning. This is an email game played a couple years ago. White enjoyed the bishop pair, and much more important was somehow this king looks weaker than our king on e1. We enjoy the bishop pair, but we can lose the bishop, but it's not about that. You have queen h5 if the knight takes on f1. And they have to, you know, like when the pawn on g5 falls, everything is just going to fall like a house of cards for black. And another thing is if they don't, for example, take on g4, but if they play first d takes c4 and bishop c4, and now they take, and when you play, they say, okay, now I open up the center, now I have faster development of my pieces. You can always consider sacking an exchange and go with the queen b3. And white has a very lively game with lots of, I would say, pieces that breathe here and threaten the black king, which is quite exposed on e8. So I very much enjoyed white's game here as well. And finally, if they on g4 play knight g7, I played knight c3, d takes, bishop takes. Now we can chase the bishop away and go with this one because they don't have time for g4 because of some crazy knight d5. You threaten knight f6. This one is about to fall, and it looks like they're about to almost call it a day in this situation. And that's why you just have to learn really a lot and to go throughout these variations in depth, because it's not easy for playing for both sides. But if I have to choose, of course I would choose white. Knight c6, it's called McLeod defense. McLeod defense, it's not any more popular nowadays. It's a pretty bad, if you ask me, opportunity by black. You play d4, build the center. If they play d6, you just capture the pawn, play knight c3, and you enjoy the full activity. I just want to place my queen on d3, not on d2, because I want to protect and to avoid pin by bishop g4. And white is just so much better. If instead of that, they go d5 with reaction in the center, I always like when I take and force them to take by queen. Somehow I always take queen on d5 as a hook for development of my pieces. So knight c3, bishop d3, castles. Now queen is threatened on d5. They gotta take, play long castle, and when you play bishop f4 and rook b1, what do you want from one position? You enjoy the bishop here, you haven't b-file, you go after the attack. This is an opposite side castle position which favors white. And I can show you this guy went on to attack queen c1, queen b2, c4, knight e5, bishop d2, and just like you see, he won the piece and won the game afterwards. Very lovely game by white, and this is another correspondence game. And once again, like many other previous lectures, I'm just going to remind you that I like correspondence games because in correspondence games they use top literature, engines, and they just analyze and let all these engines work for hours, maybe sometimes even days, and then you get like the most quality moves and the best lines. So after like d4, they go g5. That's so we've seen the d6 just gives us a very accelerated way of the like development and opening up everything, so it's good for us. The d5 is nothing, we just take and play knight c3 with further development, while on g4 we play d5. If they go knight b8, queen d4 is very lovely thing to attack the rook, queen f6 e5, and queen e4 to place the queen in the center and to patiently wait for black to fall apart. After d5, g4, you take, you take, they give you check, and finally, whenever you play this g3, queen b3, this is a very nice position. You want to play bishop f4, you want to play knight c3, you want to play long castles. Somehow, white should enjoy his game very much here. And finally, if they play third move, knight e7, it's called Osmolovski variation. Of course, you build up a strong center. And what's the point of this knight? Knight can go on g6 to defend this pawn. Well, pretty much the same idea was in Shallop defense, but in Shallop defense with knight f6, when they go with that, they force us to push e5. Sometimes it's strong, it's rather strong than weak, sometimes not, but basically in this Osmolovski system, they want to go with knight g6, and they want to defend the pawn. So after like d4, if they go knight g6, knight c3, bishop e7 to go with, first of all, not to give us h4 followed by h5, and maybe to even have bishop h4, and as a complete surprise comes this move. It's very nice pawn sack, because if they take by knight, you just capture an f4 and you get a strong center, and we can even take advantage of the open h-file for the rook on h1. If they play h5, that's another thing, because we play knight e5, we want to capture the pawn back and carry on developing pieces as soon as they grab the pawn on h4. So I'm basically not interested in the pawn on h4. I use it more as some sort of catch for black pieces, and once they do it, and once they catch it, and once they take it, then I'm just using it for some knight d5, bishop c4, and for very fast way of developing pieces. They don't have to play knight g6 immediately. They can play first d5, and when I play bishop d3, they can now go knight g6. Another fairly solid move. You certainly don't want to take and give up light square bishop for the knight to be able to get it. No, you play queen e2, and now you have beautiful move of h4. Nepo played like this couple of games. He played even against one of my best students, Grandmaster Chess Bra Eric Hansen. They played a blitz game. Actually, they played a rapid game on chess.com back to 2022, and Nepo won that game. The idea of h4 is, once again, Nepo is using more like a tricky thing, this pawn h4. Eric didn't want to take. Eric doesn't like to accept these challenges and to go into unknown territory. But after h5, bishop f4, Nepo captured the pawn without even losing the pawn. Knight c3, h6, Nepo played rook d1 and played short castle. Believe me, that's why I had to bring up his name in the beginning of this lecture, because we gotta thank Nepo so much for reviving the King's Gambit and putting it back into the life with this modern analysis. I used his games in many of these examples, and I believe he's the guy to follow for playing good modern King's Gambit. In case of h4, knight h4, you just take on f4, recapture by pawn, go knight c3, and just like in Nepo's game against Eric Hansen, you just go for full activity of your pieces, and this is like absolutely nice position. And we finally came to backward defense with h6. Backward defense with h6 was proposed to me, and I learned about this move by my great friend and student, Nikola Stoyshin. He told me about the h6, and occasionally I used it in my blitz games, and I won my games. The point of h6 is that you just want to defend your pawn that you took and play g5. It's not to be underestimated, but once again, we're going to use Nepo's approach. Nepo played d4, immediately attempting to get a pawn back, and after g5, he breaks with g3. So you see, he immediately breaks on g3 and opens the f and h files. So look at this. Now you would have opened this, and you would have open f file, which is important after bishop c4 at some point. And now you would say, aha, that's the plan. No, that's not a plan. No, that's not a plan. And everybody would think, is bishop c4 really the move here? Not only that, first of all, they have to solve the problem of bishop g5 or knight g5 at the moment. And second thing, when bishop g7, because now you cannot do it anymore, and now let's just say the whole plan with your rook along the open h file is like a little bit less effective, you just go with knight c3, developing one piece, bishop e3, queen d2, and that's how we play. So Nepo, in his games, went with long castle, and this is one of his games from Title Tuesday from 2024. Played knight g5, piece sack. He was winning after queen e2, but played knight f7, played queen e2, and somehow he really went on to play this game in typical King's Gambit fashion and won the game in 20 moves. When you take a look at these games, you really get a wish to once again start playing King's Gambit. And I got a piece of great news for you. I'm going to start using the King's Gambit after this lecture more often. I used to play it sometimes, but now I'm going to use it more often because now I even know all these lines, and certainly you guys can play it because now you have worked with this lecture. We're just completing the whole series on the King's Gambit. After like e takes f4, knight f3, g5. Finally, time for the last move and for the main line. Here, I was analyzing. You know that in some previous years on the channel, I gave you a couple of games with Muzio Gambit. Muzio Gambit used to be popular without, and before all these engines, it was like perfect game for white, like 30, 40, 50 years ago without engines. Nowadays, it's not anymore like that. You just go with castle and you sack a piece and play like this. I know it still looks amazing, very attractive, but according to the latest, analysis, in ideal scenario, you can probably get only a draw. Then I have a very interesting line. I actually spent most of my time in this PGN analyzing Kaiseritzky Gambit, G4 and 95. Kaiseritzky Gambit turns out to be absolutely fine. And when they play knight f6, you just get the pawn. And here I went very deep into the analysis of this one. I said d3, so when they play knight g3, you take the pawn on f4, sacking the rook. A very spectacular one might say variation. They gotta go queen e7 and already show some, you know, like knowledge of theoretical queen e7 and going after the king and doing stuff like that. So instead, if knight h1, you just play queen e2 going after the king. And after they go bishop e7, lovely checkmate. Check and mate. I found a couple of games ended up this way. But if not that, queen e7, you have check. And you once again have check, going with knight d5. And now I just analyzed this position a lot deeper than that. But just like I said, it's a nice position, interesting for playing, but eventually they just have a decent, I would say, counter-attacking chances, or it's a position with mutual chances, even though they're down a queen, not a clear queen. Sometimes it's for 2 pieces, sometimes it's for 3 pieces. After like queen e7, bishop e2, they can't take on h1. And here, take a look at this. Bishop g5 you play. And I found more than 200 games in this line. They go f6, you take. And nobody found the next move for white. And the next move, it's completely winning. Only 12 guys, sorry, 15 guys knew about this move out of those 200 games that I found it here. Why this? Because you want to recapture, because you want to keep checking and go after this king. Plus you want to go with knight c3 and, I don't know, use the rook afterwards when you open up just everything. No, not everyone knew about it, so now you have it here as well. If queen b4 check, c3, and it's completely winning for white, and I found more than another 200 games for this variation. White is completely winning. So what's the problem about the Kaiseritzky Gambit? Problem is when they take, you play d3, knight g3, and you take like this. They give you intermediary move check. And when you go bishop e2, they go rook g8. Only top players will be familiar, they should be familiar with queen e7 check and with rook g8 going after this knight. So after bishop g3, rook g4, bishop f2, rook g2, knight c3. d5 only move, queen d2, bishop e3 to be able to castle, and castles. You know, we can analyze this position on regular basis. This is usually a drawn game. I found so many games, correspondence games, and with mutually good play, those are draws. And just because of that, you remember when I told you here I opted for a Kaiseritzky Gambit. Well, that's one thing. But then I have to show you what is the most common thing in correspondence games. It's Quade Gambit. It's top engine choice. So you play knight c3. So instead of going for classic h4, g4, knight e5, which is called Kaiseritzky Gambit, I'm teaching you to play, and instead of going for Muzio, where you sack a piece and that is interesting maybe for bullet games, here you should be going, for my taste, this is a very lovely line, Quade Gambit with knight c3. So what's so special about this knight c3? When you play knight c3, they just have to go with knight c6, holding the center. And now, top engine choice, boom, you go with g3. If they take, you just want to, after they take, you just want to have open both. You just have to open H file and F file, but also you can immediately go for the center, attacking the G5, or you can go with some other type of things, developing bishop to C4, bishop G2, and getting and developing like a very, very lovely game. Although, if you ask me what's like the top move in this position, I believe it's just h takes g3, opening h file, opening f file, and getting further activity and actions there. So after like knight c3, knight c6, g3, they'll go g4. Looks like they're about to not only defend, but to simply create like a bone in our throat, this pawn on f3. And it looks dangerous. It looks strong for black. It looks dangerous for us, but it's not. So basically, you should be going with d4, bishop e3, overprotecting and playing a3 to avoid knight b4. We can discuss these positions, we can analyze them more, but my job, just like I told you in this lecture, was to show you different kinds of plan ideas and to give you like suggestions what should you analyze in the future. Hopefully you enjoyed in this presentation of the King's Gambit e takes f4 line. I tried to do it a little bit faster. I didn't want to go too deep into these lines. And I just believe that I showed you some very nice and important tricks there. And once again, enjoy the King's Gambit. We're finally done with the King's Gambit series. Now you have, I believe, 8 different or maybe even 9 different videos about the King's Gambit with white pieces. We've completed the series and you can get the full PGN on my site or channel. Thanks so much for watching and see you next time.